Humans have a love-hate relationship with change. We need it for growth and variety, and yet we hate the upheaval it brings into our lives. Resilience seems to be the answer. So let's explore a new kind of conversation where we look at the turbulence of change and the resilience that enables us to not only survive it, but to truly thrive from it. I'm Paula Shaw, life transition expert, grief counseling specialist, and author. I'll be spotlighting influential people on this podcast, people who have taken the steps to change it up. So join us as we share valuable information to help you navigate the rocky waters of change. Come on, jump on in. Hey, welcome to Change It Up Radio. I'm Paula Shaw, and I am so glad you decided to join me today because we have an amazing show. And I want to introduce you to somebody truly wonderful in this show today. So first of all, I want to say, if you missed last week's show, please make time to hear it, because last week we kind of set up what we're doing this whole spring season. We're calling the theme A Season of Grief. And the reason that I decided to go with grief for the theme is because if you look around you, the world is so full of grief in every corner, right? There's something going on that people are dealing with loss. And of course, the normal, natural response to loss is grief. And so, but so many people don't know what to do with grief. They're not even really clear what it is. And they don't know how to help themselves when they're grieving. And they certainly don't know how to help their loved ones when they're grieving. So my hope for this season is that as I bring you people like my guest today, and you hear their stories, that you will learn things that will help you. You'll find tools that will be there for you when it's your time to go through a season of grief. So on that note, I want to tell you about my very special friend who is going to be joining me today. He is a former NFL football player, middle linebacker. He played for the San Diego Chargers and was huge with them, like over 800 tackles, which I can't even imagine what that is like, but we're going to ask him. And then he played with the San Francisco 49ers and took them to a Super Bowl, or at least was a part of them getting to a Super Bowl. I like to think he took them, but I think he had a little help. Anyway, he then, when he left football, was contributing to the community, helping to raise funds for charities, doing all kinds of other things. And then he discovered that he was in constant pain. And that constant pain led to a diagnosis of early onset dementia. But this man was not content to just sit back and let that be his fate. So that's why I'm so honored to bring to you today Gary Plummer. So Gary, please jump on that screen with me. There you are.
Thanks for having me, Paula.
Oh my goodness. Definitely my pleasure. So Gary, what I'd love to start with is kind of like giving everybody a feeling for what was it like in the glory days? What was it like when you're on that field and you are a scary linebacker that was tackling people all the time? What I really love about you is I've seen some footage of you in the days when you were playing. You were scary. But what I know about you is that you are the sweetheart of the world and you just have a heart of gold. But back then, when you were the SF hitman, tell us a little bit about what that was like.
It's kind of crazy when you look back on it. I just saw on my Facebook feed that 40 years ago, almost exactly, was my first professional game. And that was in the USFL, played for 3 years for the Oakland Invaders. And it was just a dream come true when that happened. And you don't even think about, hey, I'm this scary guy. But the one thing that I always wanted to make sure is that you have two personalities, one for on the field and one for off the field, because there's a blurred line if you see what happens in the news with lots of professional athletes. There's entitlement, all kinds of stuff that goes with it. But you have to have a mindset that you are invincible. And so for me, it was always, I have an S on my chest and a cape on my back, and you weren't afraid of anything. Now I look back and think, those guys were huge. What was I thinking?
You're pretty big too. But I want to ask you something about that, because I know I've heard before that you have said this about the S on your chest and the cape on your back. So what does that do? What is that mindset? Are you just truly feeling like you're invincible? And did that serve you when you came into hard times later on in life?
So it served me. I give so much credit to coaches. Now, coaches are much different today because players are different. But
Mhm.
at that time, coaches had no concern for your safety. They couldn't have cared less how much pain you were in. It was, rub some dirt on it, tape an aspirin to it, get out there. And so
Mm.
there's nothing more revered in professional football than toughness. And,
Yeah.
I wasn't always the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, but, I was always tough. And I took that with pride, as evidenced by the fact that I had two surgeries during my career on Tuesday and played on Sunday. One was
The
to put
same week?
oh yeah, I had put two
Oh.
6-inch pins in this thumb and played that week. And then one, I had to have a scope on my knee. I think about those things now. Junior Seau and I laying down on these training tables in the locker room in Indianapolis, 5 minutes before the game start, getting our IVs because both of us had terrible flus, and then having to have
Oh.
it done again at halftime and having to have it done again after the game.
Oh.
Now, Paula, I get a cold and I'm the biggest wimp in the world, I just want to sleep. So, it's part of the byproduct of you being young and full of testosterone as well.
Mhm. So, Gary, this is probably a silly question, but just so that we set the table correctly for our listeners, you were a middle linebacker. Your job was to tackle people. Did you receive, or did you incur concussion damage? Were you ever in the
Well,
situation where you had a concussion?
yes, approximate, and some of your listeners will be like, "Oh my gosh, no way!" More people are believing this now because Brett Favre came out about 6 months ago, and he was talking about his issues with concussions, and he said that he's had somewhere around 2,000. I've had
Oh.
anywhere between 2,500 and 3,000 concussions. I played
Oh.
250 games in my career, at least 5 concussions a game. So do the math there. And then when you're in training camp, back in those days, there weren't any of these unpadded practices. You go out there with helmets and shoulder pads and you hit people, and you hit them twice a day. There are concussions happening at least 3 or 4 times a practice.
Oh my
So
God.
it's you put this big 5-inch forehead under the chin of a guard that weighs 320 pounds. I promise you're going to see stars. And
Mm.
those stars are they're a mild concussion. So just like a boxer that gets concussions from, not knockout punches, but just repeated blows to the head, it's the exact same thing for football.
So at that time, I mean, I got to tell you, I'm shocked to hear what you're saying, because I didn't think a human being could endure more than a couple of concussions without having serious damage. But to realize that that was part of really every day of your life, because you were either practicing or playing, and you lived through it. But at the time, did you have any idea the kind of damage that was being done to you?
None whatsoever. I would always, feel it for a short
Mhm.
period of time. It would be seeing stars, being slightly disoriented, things like that. But one of the great things was I didn't realize I have a degree in nutritional science. And so I always ate well and very
Mhm.
clean, is the term today.
Yeah.
And obviously exercising. I didn't realize how important those were to my recovery. And
Mhm.
so the damage that was done to me wasn't as bad as it would be for somebody who wasn't physically fit and wasn't putting good nutrients into their body. So it's
Ah.
extremely important for all of us to do that.
Mhm. Yes. Oh my God. Totally. I think, Gary, a lot of people, well, first of all, I guess it wasn't that long ago when we got clear that football players were suffering lifelong damage
Hmm.
from what they do during the game. In fact, I'm a member of the NFL Alumni Club here in San Diego, thanks to our mutual friend Stacy. That's a funny story I won't tell right now, but I remember going to an alumni club dinner, and there was a doctor there from the Kaizen Brain Center who was presenting the information to the guys, and these are all alumni, they're not active players, about concussion damage. And it was new information. And this was not that long ago.
Yeah, it was crazy because I actually went to a seminar that my former agent, who was quite well known at that time, he put together a panel of 5 to 7, I can't remember, of these experts from around the country who started
Mhm.
talking about concussions and all the damage that we were doing. And it was late in my career. I think I was in my 13th or 14th year. And I was so angry that these guys were telling me that if I have a grade 1 concussion, which is just seeing stars,
Uh,
that I should think about sitting out a game. There were 50 of us. Lee Steinberg was my agent. He had so many players. And so there were at least 50 of us in there. I stood up in the back of the room, and I'm not proud of it now. It was out of ignorance because the NFL kept shoving down our throat, oh, concussions, they don't do anything to you. So I
mhm.
told those guys, look, I am experiencing at least 5 to 10 of these incidents that you guys are talking about in a game. If I decided that I wasn't going to play, I wouldn't have a job the next week. And so it was just that mindset. And unfortunately, it was ignorant at the time. And if I could, I'd go back and apologize to all those doctors that I essentially said didn't know what the heck they were talking
Mm.
about.
And yet, I'm really glad that you mentioned what you just did, because I think a lot of people think, well, football players know that they're at risk for injury, but it's the sacrifice they choose to make for the fame and the money and the glory. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think again, it's the invincible complex that most of us have to have. So
Mhm.
nobody goes out there thinking that they're going to get injured. Nobody goes out there thinking that they're going to get concussed. And people are definitely more aware now.
Yeah.
I think the great thing, and we'll end up talking about it later, is through all the things that I've been able to do to find out, even if you do have a lot of brain damage from concussions, there are many things that you can do to overcome that.
Oh, that's a perfect place for us to take a quick break. And when we come back, let's talk about that. We'll be right back.
Is living in today's fast-paced world making you feel stressed and out of balance? Are anxiety, sleeplessness, depression, lack of focus, or weight gain robbing you of your relationship and your energy? If you're ready for change, you need to call Paula Shaw. Paula helps you identify and eliminate self-sabotaging thinking and behavior. Using a wide variety of mind-body techniques, she provides her clients with the most effective processes for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I am your host, Paula Shaw, and I'm here today with former NFL player Gary Plummer. And Gary was a middle linebacker for both the San Diego Chargers and the San Francisco 49ers. And we've been talking in this last segment about injury, about concussion, about all the things that many of us are aware of today that they were not aware of back in the day when Gary was playing. So, Gary, one of the things that I think about a lot is in this thing that, the difference between today and before in terms of what people understood about football. I mean, I have to tell you, I know people who no longer watch it. They just can't because they're so aware of what it's doing to the bodies and then the lives of the guys. So you were just saying that when you were playing in the 80s and the 90s, that everybody wasn't as aware of what's going on, nor were you. So here's kind of another silly question. You watch a football game and you see everybody pounding into each other and jumping on each other, and then everybody seems to bounce right back up. So what I wonder is, does it look like it hurts more than it does? Or does it actually hurt that much?
Oh my gosh. I watch games now and I say, I cannot believe I used to do that. Because people will see me and they'll say, oh my gosh, you're still really fit. You know, you look like you can still play. Paula, I used to say that I had one hit left in me and I was just saving it for the right time. I have no hits left in me. It's a brutal game. And I think the analogy that I often make is just think of a gauntlet of probably 20 people in a line over here and 20 people in a line over here. And they say, run through that line. But all those guys have baseball bats. And they're hitting you as you're running through. I am not kidding you. So another really good example is that your job as a middle linebacker is to take on an offensive guard that we talked about already, but also a fullback. Well, fullbacks are usually about the same size as a middle linebacker. So his job is to block me so that the running back can run through the hole. So I get a guy that's 235 pounds running, full speed from 5 yards away for him, 5 yards away from me. We meet in the hole. Honestly, almost every time that was a concussion. And then, oh, by the way, the running back coming through the hole wasn't always a small, quick guy. Sometimes it was somebody like the Nigerian Nightmare. His name was Christian Okoye from the Kansas City Chiefs, 260 pounds. So I would get a concussion taking on that fullback and then another one making the tackle. The only good part about tackling Christian Okoye was after you finished, he would say in his Nigerian accent, "Oh, Gary, very nice tackle." It was, I wanted to hate this guy because he was an opponent, but I always loved him and I still see him at events to this day.
Oh, that's so cute. So when did you know that something was, well, first of all, let's go back. When a game was over, how long did it take you to start feeling okay again? Or were you in pain for a long time?
So once it really depended on the age, early in my career, you're young, you're full of testosterone, growth hormone, all that fun stuff. You recover very fast. I would say normally you're recovered by Tuesday, which is great because then you have practice on Wednesday. But the longer you go, the more you realize that once the season starts in July, you will not be feeling good until approximately a month after the season ends in January. It did get significantly worse. I used to have, especially being in the Bay Area, I grew up there. So there would be 50, 70 people at a game. And one time my brother was waiting, a little brother, waiting in the parking lot after the game. And it would take me sometimes an hour to get out because I would have to get the tape all taken off of me. I'd have to get treatment from the trainers. I'd have to get the stim machines put on, all these things, just so I could walk again. Wow. And I'd come out there and my brother, why are you always the last one out? And I would look, at the time I was 36 years old. I mean, are you kidding me? You're not supposed to play this game. The average age is 26 years old.
Oh my. Oh, wow.
at him and I shook my head. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
So, Gary, how old were you when you retired?
1 week away from my 38th birthday. And
Okay.
I was actually disappointed. I wanted to play until I was 40, but I found out that last season, it was a teammate of mine, Kenny Norton, who said, dude, you're limping. It was in a practice session. And I'm
Oh.
like, no, I'm not, because you ignore pain.
Mhm.
And so I started watching myself on this practice tape, and I, in fact, was limping. So literally immediately went to our trainer. He sent me to our team doctor. They x-rayed it. The doctor said, oh, you need a total hip replacement.
Oh, gosh.
I said, what? He said, literally, you need a total hip replacement. And so we made some changes to the practice schedule during that year. I didn't practice much, and I just had to play on game day. But I knew that that would be my last season.
So even with a hip replacement, you were still playing?
I didn't have the hip replacement yet.
Oh,
It
you
took,
didn't.
I didn't get it until 3 years later when I was 41 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at what point did you start noticing repercussions and problems physically as a result of all those years playing?
It was a long time because I had 17 surgeries while I played. I've had 6 since, so 23 total. I've had a lot of problems with the thumb that had the 2 6-inch pins in it because literally when we took the cast off, I think it was 6 weeks after I, had broken it and they had to pull the pins out. The pins were bent like this. So I've had lots of problems with that since. But it was again, you choke that stuff down. You played with muscles that were slightly torn. You played with sprained ankles. You played with all these injuries and illnesses. So for me, the headaches that would last for a couple of days after a game that ended up my last year, they never stopped. And usually in the off season, they would go away after a month and a half, something like that.
Mhm.
But again, now at 38 years old, they never went away. But for me, I cannot complain about a wimpy little headache when, I was a tough guy that could play with this wrist was shattered in 23 places. I played 3 weeks later. So when you put things in that perspective, you say to yourself, oh my gosh, it's a headache. Just stop your whimpering.
Yeah.
So it really exacerbated the problem for me. And I had to learn how to understand that I'm not invincible anymore. And it's tough for guys. I think that's what's tough for police officers, military guys, and athletes, because we're all in that macho realm of, I got to be a tough guy.
Yep. So when did it become so severe that or was there an event that was a turning point for you that made you look into what this damage was really creating?
Yeah, absolutely. So those things that were taps on the back of my head became punches in the back of my head. And that was 24/7, 365 days a year for quite some time. And unfortunately, when Junior Seau took his life, it was, I had been having 2-3 days in a row where I wouldn't get out of bed. The depression, nothing was giving me joy. And when Junior committed suicide, I was doing cardio, and the TV comes on, and I'm stunned because I had seen him a week before that, and
You two had been friends for a long time, right?
long time. I was his mentor. He was a 20-year-old rookie, and I was a 30-year-old old man, as he used to call me, or Papa Smurf, or Father Time. And so he was like, one of my little brothers. And so when it happened, it was devastating. And my wife came home about 3 hours later, and I was still sitting on that same recumbent bike. I wasn't doing the bike. I was just sitting there, tears just still rolling down my face. And she took the time to take that opportunity to tell me it's time that you need to go see somebody.
Mhm.
And I respect my wife enough that I did do that, and that's where the recovery all started, with going and seeing a counselor.
Did you have any idea that Junior was in that kind of emotional condition where he would take his own life? Or was this a
Well,
total shock?
it wasn't a total shock, because it was somewhere between a month and 6 weeks prior to that. He had run off of PCH, Pacific Coast Highway 1, and they said that it looked like he was trying to commit suicide. Now, Junior, being such a stud at 6'3", 255 pounds,
Mm.
that could bench press a house, it didn't do anything to him.
Yeah.
And so I had actually talked to him about that incident and said, dude, if there's ever a time that you need to get away from everything, just come to my house. You can hide from the media, family pressures.
Mhm.
So I knew that he was having issues. And so when I saw him at this golf tournament, I went up and hugged him and said, I just want you to know you've got a place to go if you ever need to,
Mm.
and feel safe. And he's like, bro, I'm good. Don't worry about it. And so I actually felt good about Junior. And that's why it was such a shock when it happened.
Yes. And that's such a great point, Gary, because I think I too have experienced suicide in my family. And, we just never have any idea from the outside of what people are feeling on the inside, or what happens in that one moment when they go, I just can't do this anymore. And in my thinking, that's a result of a lot of unspoken grief and sadness that just hasn't been dealt with, because either they didn't have a safe place or a safe person to really be able to explore it with, or there could have been teaching in growing up that you don't share this, or you got to be strong, you don't tell people that you're scared or you're hurting, or that sort of thing.
That's exactly right. That suppression of the way you're feeling. First of all, it's a pride thing, I think, for most men, especially macho men. It's just tough to talk about it. And if we can get a message out today that it doesn't make you any less of a man to go out and seek help. There's somebody in your life, whether it's a girlfriend, a wife, a significant other, that sees it. And I really pay homage to women in general, because they see things far sooner than we do as men.
Yes. And we're a little more open about talking about them, because
Absolutely.
we didn't get that culturalization that we got to be tough. So we can cry our tears. I love it that Corey, your wife, sat down with you and said, I don't want you to end up being the next Junior Seau. I don't want that to happen in our life. And you listened. And so you went and sought help. And we're going to get into that part of the story in just a minute when we come back from this break. We'll be right back. Paula Shaw here. I'm thrilled that LifeWave phototherapy patches, which use no drugs or chemicals, have become a part of my life and my business. My family and I all use their wearable patch technology, and the results are life-changing. My parents in their 90s used the X39 patch, which activates stem cells, reverses aging, and improves the function of every area of the brain. I love X39 because I can work out with a 30-year-old with no problem. And it's erased my fine lines and given my skin a youthful glow. LifeWave patches use a patented form of phototherapy, frequencies of light, to safely boost health and wellness at the cellular level. No drugs. To learn more, go to my website, lifewave.com/safe health. That's lifewave.com/safe health. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I am your host, Paula Shaw, And I am talking today with Gary Plummer.
Paul, I just saw that commercial and I'm thinking to myself, wait, why are we supposed to be impressed that you work out with 30-year-olds? I thought you were in your 30s.
And that wonderful line of dialogue was just spoken by the fabulous Gary Plummer. If you're just joining us, he is a former NFL football player. And thank you, Gary. I so appreciate that. But yes, I am that those LifeWave patches are truly part of my life, and they have changed my life. And yes, I can hold my own with the 30-year-olds in those spin classes and other classes. So thank you so much for
I love
saying
it.
that. You kind of threw me off there, Gary. I think I'm blushing. All right. So, Gary, back to our story. For those of you who may just be joining us, we were just talking about the point at which Gary actually sought help because he was in constant pain, head pain all the time. And what was the diagnosis, Gary? What did they tell you was the problem?
So there obviously concussions, the symptoms of them are headaches. And so, the psychiatrist that I went to see, didn't diagnose anything there, but suggested that I go take some yoga, that I needed to,
Oh,
learn how to meditate. And she thought it would be very helpful. And so begrudgingly,
I was going to say, that
I
doesn't sound like
agreed.
something you thought was a great idea at first.
Not at all. And begrudgingly, I said I would go for a week. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was in the yoga class and, it's finishing after whatever it is, 40 minutes. And, we're going to go into Shavasana. Now, I couldn't do hardly any of the poses. And the Shavasana is when you lay down at the end. I could do that part.
I'm really good at that part too.
and you're supposed to breathe and, this breathing in this energy and breathing out all the toxins and all that. And I'm just rolling my eyes and I'm mocking the teacher in my brain. And I probably even went, ooh, this is really good, whatever. And I was still in, S on my chest mode. So it was right at the end, because, we only do that for 3 to 5 minutes. It was right at the end. Remember, I've had a headache now for close to 15 years where I can't even remember the last time that didn't feel like somebody was punching me in the back of the head.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden it went away. And I just went, okay, that's crazy. But it's just a coincidence. I don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Went back the next day, same thing, Shavasana at the end. And it was the first time was about a 30-second respite. This time it was a couple of minutes. Maybe this is real. Okay, I will continue to go back because I promised my wife. And it just kept going up. So after a week, I was getting 5 to 10 minutes a day of not having a headache, which was like unheard of. And I signed up for a year. And
Beautiful.
when I signed up for a year, the people that were taking yoga and the instructors, they, they're very holistic. And so they were giving suggestions. And so that was the start. And then the Forever Young Foundation, which a former teammate, Steve Young, I do charity events with him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were opening up a music center, a dedicated music center at a children's hospital in Utah, where Steve Young is from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to this thing and they started talking about music therapy and how great it is for children recovering from surgery. And so I said, well, I'm going to try it. And so I had started gardening not long before that because I was redoing my entire yard. And I did enjoy that. But when I started gardening while listening to classical music, it was as if it wasn't work anymore. And I just felt calmer. And so those were the first things that really opened up my mind to trying different things that were going to help. And each one of those things I felt helped that much. And if I could continue to go in that direction, maybe I'd get better.
There's so much in what you've said that I love. First, I want to make clear to everybody, when you did seek help, the diagnosis you got was early onset dementia, right? So you were looking at maybe this headache is more than just a headache. Is that
Well, it was
correct?
so when I went to seek help the first time, it was
Mhm.
with the counselor, and it was not long after that I went to the NFL's dedicated neurologist to determine whether I had uh, this diagnosis or not, and
I
they're the
see.
ones who said that I had early onset dementia.
Mm.
Interestingly, I started all of these, things, which gave me hope because then, through Forever Young Foundation, I found Wounded Warriors and I started talking to some of those guys and what they were doing.
Uh-huh.
Found out that meditation was very important.
Mhm.
And then I put in a steam shower with essential oils. And
Wow.
all of those things took a lot of time. And I figured I could compress them all at the same time. So, I do about a 35-minute yoga program in the steam shower while listening to classical music
Beautiful.
with essential oils. And
Yeah.
so that's when my progress really accelerated, I think. And I'm still open to new ideas.
Mhm.
And I think the important thing for viewers is that what worked for me isn't going to necessarily work for everyone else. You have to
Mhm.
find your own path. And there
Mhm.
are so many things out there to do. Um, it's just a matter of taking that step to find it.
Do you remember, Gary, what it felt like when you first heard those words, early onset dementia, or, even just thinking, having this pain in my head may be my fate for the rest of my life? Because one of the things I was explaining in last week's show is that so many people think grief is just a result of a death. But grief is the normal result of any kind of loss. You are now looking at loss of the quality of your life, loss of the physical body that you had known, and then on top of it all, loss of a friend who took his own life. You were pretty steeped in grief in that period of time. Do you remember what you felt like? You mentioned depression and the tears after you heard about Junior, but anything else that you were experiencing that stands out in your mind?
Well, prior to that situation with Junior, I had those days where I wouldn't get out of bed. And, I
Mhm.
can remember feeling like I was falling down into the bottom of a well. And
Ooh.
all I could see that the light kept getting dimmer and dimmer. And so those were pretty dark times. But for me, I think because I had so much adversity early in my life, whether it was, 5 divorces between my two parents, living with an alcoholic stepfather,
Mm.
the old school, you get to see your father every 2 weeks, for
Oh,
one
yeah.
day on the weekend.
Mhm.
Um, not having enough money in the household for us to even eat.
Mm.
Those were tough times. And then
Yes.
remembering having to walk on where I didn't get a scholarship to go play at the University of California at Berkeley, and being told that I wasn't good enough, and then not getting drafted in the NFL. It was just on and on. Seeing
Oh, wow.
for me, it
A
was
lot.
so many things that I grabbed strength from. So that's the negative part of it. And I think, message I'd really like to get out there is there are opportunities in all of our lives. Unfortunately, they come disguised as hard work. And so a lot
Mhm.
of people don't recognize them. But for me, I had a brother who was diagnosed with leukemia when I was 20 years old. And he got away from taking the chemo because it was killing him.
Mm.
And so he just started this program that he made up himself where he was just going to run. And
Really?
so I started running with him. And I can remember the first day we ran 10 miles, and I had never run 10 miles in my life. At this time, I wasn't, a very big guy compared to now. I was 6 foot even, 200 pounds. And, I could run pretty well. And so the next day, we ran 18 miles.
Oh my
And
God.
I'm thinking to myself, I want to quit so bad, but I've got this dude who's dying next to me running. How could you possibly think about that? And I drew upon that experience thousands and thousands of times in my life. And so for me, I think we all have a genetic component for optimism or pessimism, but there's also learned behavior. And that learned behavior, I think I was born an optimist, but it's gotten, much more optimistic I've become as I've gotten older. And it's because of seeing so many wonderful things that have happened, and I promised my sister, who 23 years ago passed away when she was 40 years old from colorectal cancer. And I used to take her to her chemo treatments. And I promised her at the very end, when she knew essentially there was no hope, I said, I promise you, I will live each and every day to the best of my ability. And I promise after the age of 40, I'm going to take each and every one of those days as a gift. And it's been great. It's been very helpful.
That's such a beautiful attitude. And I know that part of the reason you have that attitude is because you've got a pretty amazing partner in your wife, Corey. Tell us a little bit about the part she played in getting you on board, because may I just say, a lot of the thing, what you just said about having a steamy shower and doing yoga and the aromatherapy and the music doesn't sound a lot like a really tough middle linebacker kind of behavior. Not what I would expect to hear from Gary Plummer, but I love it. And I love that it's saving your life and changing the quality of your life. So
I don't have to be the tough one in the relationship anymore, because she's 5'2", 112 pounds of fury. And she's a feisty one. And I love that about her. And she has really been able to put me in check many, many times. And it's truly been remarkable to be going through all of this with somebody that is so strong, that has such great vision. She worked in human resources for a long time, as she ended up retiring a year ago to take care of her dad in the last year of his life. And she's just an amazing woman. So she was also a Charger girl. So I'm going to go like this. And the best thing that ever happened by leaving the Chargers. Why am I not getting this correctly?
It's so hard to get the angle right when you're looking.
I'm going to take it off and.
Is that your Charger ring?
No, that's the 49er ring.
Super Bowl ring.
That's the Super Bowl ring for beating the Chargers. On this side, it has the score 49-26. Not only does it have all those things, on this side is my name.
I'm going to put it back up there one more time, because now I have my glasses on.
Okay.
Oh, this is the first time I've ever seen a Super Bowl ring this close. Wow. Beautiful.
So not only did I get one of these little trinkets for that, but I took their best cheerleader. Corey was a cheerleader for the Chargers that year.
Oh, I love
so it
that.
It worked out quite well.
Yes. I think that's perfect. And on that note, let's take a quick break, and we will be right back with learning more of the incredible story of Gary Plummer.
For those looking to improve their lives, there's nobody better to turn to than Paula Shaw. Paula helps people regain successful lives by identifying and eliminating self-sabotaging behavior using a multitude of mind-body techniques to identify and resolve their core issues. Working with a wide variety of healing modalities, she provides her clients with the most effective process for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and with me today is former NFL football player Gary Plummer. He played for the Chargers and the Niners, and we have been talking today about the glory of all of that and the price, the high price that Gary paid physically and on many other levels, mentally, emotionally, for all those years but being in the game. So, Gary, we mentioned that you at one point had a diagnosis of early onset dementia, but you're like one of the sharpest people I know. So, well, did you actually shift that reality, or was that a wrong diagnosis? What was the deal?
I think that what happened was I took the tests at my absolute worst, and I can remember it was about an 8.5 hour test, and I must have cried 3 or 4 times during the test. It was things like these little children's blocks that you had to put into shapes, and they would tell you a number and a color and a state and math, whatever. There were only like 5 things that you had to remember. They asked you right afterwards, what were those 5 things? And I could remember those. And then they'd ask you 3 minutes later, then 10 minutes later, then 20 minutes later, and then an hour later. And of course I was remembering nothing. I just felt, I graduated from high school with a B+ average. I had a 3.7 when I was in junior college, and I thought I was a fairly smart guy. And I felt like an idiot. And all those things had been happening to me where I did a lot of flipping of condominiums when my brother and I, early in my career, because I made no money. And so I could do bathroom and kitchen remodels. It got to the point where I literally couldn't change a door handle. I felt inadequate. And so it was a terrible time, to go through it. So I was motivated, and I got that little bit of hope just from the yoga. So for listeners and for viewers out there, if they could just take that step in any direction, and if that one doesn't work, take a different step, because that's the only way to get better. If you never take that first step, you'll never get better.
I've been saying to grievers for years that, and this is what I discovered in the year that our family dog of 14 years and my former husband died within a month of each other. And I had a practice. I had 2 young adult kids that needed me. And I really had to look around at, what do I do? How am I going to get myself back to a better place as quickly as possible? And of course, I used a lot of the tools of energy psychology. So I worked with my biofield. I tapped meridian points. I did a lot of different things. But also, I just realized that if I just do one thing every day, even if it's just light a candle and talk to Gary, my former husband, Gary, even if I just take a gratitude walk. I love gratitude walks. You get out there and you breathe fresh air and you just look at all the things you can be, and you note them, that you can be grateful for. The blue sky, the smell of the freshly blooming flowers, the earth after the rain, whatever it is, that you can feel grateful for, that can shift your whole mentality and your whole emotional feeling life in that segment of time. So I love that. Really what I've been hearing you say is yeah, I did a little bit that day, and I went back the next day, and then the next day I added this, and then I did that, because what you're doing, or what you did, that is working so well for you, is exactly what I would prescribe to people who are hurting. That finding something, maybe yoga is not your thing, maybe it's being of service somewhere. Maybe it's
Absolutely.
finding that to be grateful for. You know, each of us can find something. Maybe it's lighting a candle and meditating. I do that every day of my life, since that time too, because like you, I found it made all the difference in the world.
I find that walking my 16-year-old dog, that used to be my son's dog,
Ah.
that happens frequently, I'm sure, uh, to the people watching. He's 16. We have taken him to the vet at least 5 times to say goodbye.
Ah.
And we've we haven't actually taken him. We have called the doctor and said, hey, we're going to have to set up this appointment. And I'm not kidding you, every single time, because I take him for a walk every day,
Mhm.
he bounces back. And
I
this
love
started
that.
like 3 or 4 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And the 16-year-old dog is still alive. And I thought about it yesterday on Teddy and my walk.
Uh-huh.
Um, just the joy you see on his face. You literally can see he
Yeah.
sleeps 23 hours a day, but
Mm.
that 1 hour it takes
Ah.
us to walk 1 mile,
Mhm.
he is the happiest dog in the world. And it just brings me great joy.
And that walk shifts his energetic vibration to this much higher level. It's so beautiful.
One of the things that I'm disappointed about is that when COVID was happening, there
Mm.
were 40, 50 dogs out there. And now it's back to
Oh,
3, maybe 4 dogs. And
yes,
so it's a little bit disappointing that, it's that opportunity to get out and meet neighbors
yes,
and just enjoy this beautiful weather that we're having today.
yes.
And it's disappointing that a lot of people have stopped that.
Gary, one of the things that we have talked about that can also really be helpful when you're grieving or when you're trying to overcome some kind of loss is being of service. And you do a lot. You do a lot of fundraising and you speak. And you shared a story with me that I would love you to share with our listeners about the young man with leukemia. I think it would be a lovely way for us to close our show.
Oh, this is going to be a tough one, Paul.
I know.
So there's a kid, his name was Gabe Catalfo. I met him through mutual friends. He grew up in Berkeley. He was a huge Cal Berkeley football fan. When there's not many of those. So, and he was also a huge 49er fan. And she said, hey, this kid, Gabe Catalfo, wants to meet you. I had already retired. I was doing the broadcast for the 49ers. And
Ah.
so I drove to Berkeley and I went and saw him and literally instantly made this connection with this kid.
Mm.
And I told him the story about my brother who had leukemia that
Uh-huh.
refused to die.
Mm.
That I said, Gabe, I want you to promise me right now you will never, ever give up. And he said, okay, cool, I got this. And the wisdom that that kid gave to my children and to me throughout those years when he was 12, 13, 14 years old was unbelievable.
Mm.
What facing death every day can do for somebody.
Yeah.
And so I got a phone call from Gabe's dad, Phil, and he said, Gary, I need you to fly up here and give Gabe permission to die.
Mm.
I I was stunned.
Mm.
And at first, the tears are flowing. I'm wondering I don't even know what this man just asked me to do.
Yeah.
And literally within less than 30 seconds, something came over me. And I said, Gabe's going to make it all right. So I flew up there and there were about 20 family members and friends all around him. He hadn't moved essentially in 2 weeks. He was actually on the couch in the living room, and I asked everybody to leave. And I said, Gabe, I know I told you the story about my brother, working so hard and never giving up. I said, you remember that game my last year against the Chiefs, and we were getting our butts kicked 37-3 in the fourth quarter? He goes, yeah, you guys sucked. And I said, yeah, we did. I said, I was yelling and screaming at players on the field with 2 minutes to go in the game, that they weren't trying hard enough. And I look back on that and I think, why did I subject myself to further injury? I didn't know when to say when. And I said, Gabe, it's time. It's time to say when. And I want you to know I couldn't be prouder of you. I have never seen anyone fight like you have. This young 15-year-old, he literally didn't have a nose left. I mean, he had so many lesions on his face. He had gotten to that point, and he hadn't moved again in 2 weeks. And just then he got up on his elbows and went like this. And so I hugged him and I picked him up. And at that time, his family came in at the exact same time. And the entire room was just in tears. And, I just said, I love you. I'll always have you in my heart, Gabe. And I want you to know there's a legacy here. You've taught my children things that I never could have taught them.
Oh my goodness, Gary, that is such a beautiful story, and a story that just has so much value on so many levels. I think that it's just a perfect place for me to say thank you. Thank you for all you have contributed in your lifetime to the world. Thank you for all you contributed to us today. This was even more wonderful than I knew it was going to be. Thank you for being here with me, Gary.
Thanks for having me and just getting the word out. I have so much gratitude for so many people that helped me get to this point. So thank you.
Bless you. And thank you all for being with us today. And we'll see you next week when we'll be talking to Jenna Mendez about the grief of foster children. Please be with us then. Bye-bye. Humans have a love-hate relationship with change. We need it for growth and variety, and yet we hate the upheaval it brings into our lives. Resilience seems. Thanks for joining me on Change It Up Radio. I hope you found this episode informative and entertaining. If you want to hear past shows or you want to get information on being a guest or a sponsor of this show, go to changeitupradio.com. We all know that change is inevitable and it's necessary. But darn it, it's also tricky. My goal is to help you make the experience of change smoother and more productive. If you've benefited from this show, please subscribe to it, share it, and review it. That helps me to tune into what you really want to hear and what you really want to learn more about. Remember, you can find us on every major podcast platform and also on YouTube, Facebook, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. We look forward to seeing you next week for Change It Up Radio.